So arguments in Java are what you pass into a method, and parameters are what you receive in the method. So for example, let's take this. This rectangle right here is going to pass in two values. So let's divide this in two. And let's say this circle would be considered the method. Okay, so this would be where the argument is, and this is where the parameters are. So let's say we give in the values like 28 and 14. So these two things are what you want to give into this right here. What you do in Java is not just transfer these 2 points from here to here. Oh, oops. This just doesn't happen. Rather, what you do is you create a copy of this, so 28 and 14, and then you move these copies to here. So you move this right here, and you move this right here, and then these two would be the parameters. Now, another thing to point out is that this method right over here, it should already know what is expecting of it. So think of this as a homeowner, and the homeowner is expecting 2 guests to come to his or her house. So if you don't specify that these 2 people, for example, are coming, then the homeowner would not accept them in. So in the same way, you need to actually specify what these 2 are going to be. Now, if we think of this in terms of code, and I'll show you the actual Java code that goes into this, but just looking at it visually, if you think about this, these 2 would be integer values. So 28 is an integer value and 14 is an integer value. And hence, this method would need to already know that it's expecting 2 integer values. You can't put something like a string value but give it an integer value, because that wouldn't make sense. So in terms of the actual Java code, I will show you this example. So this class I have here is the main class. It has the public static void main method and will act as the launcher because every program needs this method to run. So what I'll also create is this class, which is the dog class. And this is based on object-oriented programming, where it has a certain amount of characteristics and functions. Now, if you look right here on this method, take tjis, it's asking for 2 integer values, or it's not asking for, but it can receive 2 integer values. Like the example I showed before, this would basically be like the homeowner who is expecting 2 guests, and it knows what type these 2 guests should be. So in this case, it's an integer. And if it's not an integer, it would not welcome these guests into his or her house. So that's why we need to specify which one we want, and hence when we're actually giving 2 values, it should be these 2 data types and nothing else. Now I will show you an example where I make an instance of the dog class, which is this class right here, and I've gone more in depth about how these classes work and how instances of classes work, and I will leave a link down below regarding just object-oriented programming and how this stuff works. But basically, in this case, we are using object-oriented programming. We're using the dot operator, which is right here, and we're basically calling this method right over here, and we're going to be giving in 2 values, and we're expecting two integer values. So we're going to be given something like 14 and 39, let's say. And once we do this, these two values, these two integer values, are going to go into this method right here, and it's going to print out this because that's what the method does, and it's going to print out this string statement and then the integer values like this. So let's test this out. And we could see right here, the age of the dog is 14 and the age of the second dog is 39. We could always manipulate this to kind of give a user input, but that is just an extension of the basic concept that I'm trying to teach, which is how arguments and parameters would work. So once you know how the fact that we could give in values to a method like this, as long as the method actually expects these two types of data types. So here I've just made a scanner class, and let me import this. So once we have the scanner class, we could just get some user inputs, which could just make this basic program a bit more interactive with the user. So I could just add like a statement asking for the user to put something in. And I could just replicate this, but ask for the second age. This would be called second. And here, instead of putting in like default values, you could kind of ask the user. So it would be first age and second age. So once we run this, it's asking us for the first age, so let's say 12, and for the second age, let's say 88. And then again, it's the same thing, but in this case, we've asked the user for these values, which we've given to the method right over here, and it's done what a normal method does, which is basically whatever you want. But in this case, I've just printed out the parameters that were given in by the user. And this was just a very basic explanation of how object-oriented programming works, and I'll go into more complex examples in a future video. Thank you for watching.